hear me out on this one. What if I told you, if in one of the GTA games, one of the main characters, one of the main side characters was originally not in the game, and they were not originally a part of the story, and this character is close friends with the protagonist, and appears in the majority of the missions. Who is this character? It's Clay Simmons from The Lost and Damned. Okay, so I'm pretty sure your first thought on this would be, how was he not originally part of the game? Because he has a lot of dialogue. He appears in 12 out of 22 missions, which is 54%, and compared to like Little Jacob, who appears in 14 out of 91 missions, that's only 15%. So he appears in quite a lot of the missions. Plus, he's in the game wars, and he's in the friend activities and the bike races. So how could he been not originally in the story if he's got this huge role in the game? Well, for the missions, he technically only appears in 5 of them, because seven of them are optional, but still, that's 22%, and compared to Little Jacob, who's literally one of the most prominent characters in GTA 4, who appears in 15%, that's still a bit more than him. I am going to be going back into this a little bit more later on into the video, but I want to quickly say that throughout this video, I'm going to be comparing Clay to Terry, because they're always partnered up, they're friends of Johnny's, and they can be both called for backup, so yeah. Also, as the video goes on, the evidence is going to become more greater and greater, so I'm going to be starting off with the more minor stuff, and as it goes on, later on, the evidence will become more substantial. Okay, so the first point in this is, it's a bit minor, but Clay does not have a record in the LCPD database on the in-game website. All the main characters in The Lost and Damned do. Johnny, of course, does. Billy, Brian, Jim, even Ashley does as well, and of course Terry as well. But Clay just doesn't. I mean, the only other main character that doesn't have a record is Angus, but he's a bit more different because he's only in the cutscene. He doesn't appear in game. I'm gonna go a bit more. He deserves his own video, his own topic. But he doesn't have a record, so I'm not gonna be talking about him. But he's the only other main Lost and Damned character that doesn't have a record. Now we're going to be going into the missions and Clay's importance to the story. So I'm going to go a bit more back to what I said before about the missions. So the side activities, like the gang wars, friend activities, bike races, those are side activities. So he could have been added in later since they're side activities and they're separate from the main story. Speaking of the story, if you remove Clay from The Lost and Damned, how much would that affect the story of it, the entire plot? I don't think they would actually do that much if you really think about it. I mean, he'd really just make Johnny's task maybe a bit harder, because he doesn't have another person helping him out throughout the events of the game, but he doesn't really affect Billy's arrest or Jim's death. I mean, speaking of that, he doesn't really react to it. The entire Lost doesn't react to it. They don't react to Billy's arrest or Jim's death, really. I mean, that's another topic for another time, but yeah. But then also this importance to the story stuff, that's the same thing goes with Terry. If you took him out, he doesn't really change anything, so I'm not sure if this really counts as evidence. The next point is going to be the Lost MC was originally racist. Yay, we have to talk about this on the channel. So in Below Your Cover, Playboy X mentions about the Lost being racist and that they're all white.
Them boys, the Lost, they in some heavy type of gang war is what I heard. Crazy white boy shit. Man, I ain't scared of nobody. All them bikers is racist as shit is all.
But obviously that's not true because we got Clay and Jim. So how is that true? I'm pretty sure that's just been debunked. But it does make sense if Clay wasn't a part of the story, and if IV Jim was the original Jim since he was white. Sounds a bit weird saying that. I'm not going to count any base game IV Lost MC peds that are not white as also debunking it, since they could have also been easily changed later on throughout development, since they're just pretty easy to change, since they're just peds. Now this is where the video becomes a bit more interesting, because this is one of the most important points, which is in the cutscenes of all things. In all, and I really do mean all, of Clay's appearances in all of the cutscenes, he has no dialogue at all. I mean, in some of them, like in 1 or 2, he does have like a couple of voice lines in the background, but those aren't like subtitled, and those could have just been added in later.
Man, gentlemen, what's happening, Johnny?
My brother.
Clay also has no facial animations at all during any of his cutscene appearances, but he works fine with the player/Johnny's facial animations. So does that mean Johnny was used as a base for his cutscene model? Or maybe Clay as a whole? I don't know. Okay, looking at this closer up, it's definitely not perfect one-to-one, but it's still better than some other examples I've seen. with cutscene characters using the player facial animations. It could be a coincidence that this works, but still, but his model is rigged even though he doesn't have facial animations, which is another thing to note, so that's a bit strange. And Clay also has no blend shapes file, which that file, if you don't know, handles expressive facial movements, and usually characters that don't have them are characters that are minor or have little facial expressions. Clay also doesn't really interact with anything that happens during the cutscene. He's just there. I mean, he doesn't do anything. He just like follows them behind them. He doesn't really react to anything that does happen. But he still doesn't like talk to any of the other characters face to face, or like he gives them an object or interacts with them. There's only one time in the entire game, I think, where he basically interacts with any of the other characters, which is in the opening cutscene for the end of chapter, where he fist bumps Johnny. And that cutscene still is very short, and it was probably re-recorded, I think. I really don't know, but judging by the fact that Terry's Yeah doesn't have a subtitle, I think it was redone. I don't know, I think they just had a very short time where they could redo that, so... But I really don't know. In the opening cutscene for Clean and Serene / the DLC as a whole, he's dangerously close to clipping with Jason and some of the other characters, and he actually might be clipping with them. And he's also not next to Terry. I don't know if that doesn't really count, but he's just not next to Terry. And he does warp underground when they're all on their bikes. He's all deformed. He's like, his legs are through his shoulders. I mean, Jason also does warp underground, but he's just frozen on his last frame from the last scene. Also in Clear and Serene, when Billy returns to the clubhouse in that cutscene, he's in the back. He's like the very last one of them, and he doesn't celebrate with them. He just walks past them and sits down, all deformed under the map, and he stays there for the rest of the cutscene. In the first cutscene for Angels in America, he just sits there, and he's separate from the rest of the cast. He's on the opposite side of them. He's not sitting next to them. And no one really looks at him or speaks to him, and vice versa. He does look at Jason, but then they probably didn't know the basic events of the cutscene when they were doing the motion capture for that. So, I mean, they probably knew that Jason was going to go in and alert them, so just very close to clipping with him. And he's in a very awkward spot. He almost knocks into Angus. And in the start of the second scene, when they exit the clubhouse, he's warped under the ground, all the form like before in the cutscene at the very start of it, and then he warps in, and he goes back and forth a little bit. It's a little strange, and he's also close to clipping with Angus again, and he just stands in the back as well. He just stands in the back, separate from the rest of the cast, and he does react to Billy's shot when he fires at the Angels of Death Lieutenant or whatever, but. Like I said before, they could have known the basic events, and they probably knew that was going to happen. And I also want to point out, where's Terry in this cutscene? He's just not in here at all. In its war and action/reaction, ignoring all these broken feet and shoulders, Clay is just not with them at all. I mean, you got Jim, you got Brian, you got Terry all hanging out, but Clay's just not there at all. They just couldn't be bothered adding him. In the opening cutscene for Bed Standing, he just sits there on his bike. He doesn't interact with anyone or talk with any of them. He just sits there. Now, the biggest piece of evidence in all these cutscene stuff is the Get Lost final cutscene. Clay, throughout that cutscene, you can't really see it, but if you use free cam, you can tell it's just a looped animation. He's just standing there doing the same pose, like holding up his hips or whatever, touching his hips, I don't know. But it's just the same looped animation. It's clearly looped. And he even clips through Johnny. I mean, look at him. He's literally touching him. What are you doing, Step Clay? Throughout this cutscene, he has no dialogue and facials as usual. And you can see him, like in the other cutscenes, you can see him, like, warping into place and stuff. I mean, it's just so weird. Plus, you can see how he stands in the back, because they probably might have known about that clipping issue from before. I don't think they did. But he just stands in the back. He's not standing right next to the other characters. Plus, when there's close-ups of all the characters, you can see a close-up of Johnny, Terry, Angus. But there's none of Clay. They could have easily added that in, but I presume they didn't want to add that in because they would have just shown that very smiling, happy Clay with no facial animation. So, I think that this is really what sells it. I'm pretty sure he wasn't a part of the main game originally. This cutscene is the biggest piece of evidence in all of this, in my opinion. Alright, so that is it for this video. Mostly, there's a couple other things I want to point out. This is in trailer 1 for The Lost and Damned, the first debut trailer. He has no dialogue unlike the other characters in the trailer, and it's very short. But also in the trailer, Terry has no section. So maybe, I think that might be because they were thinking of changing his appearance throughout that, since Terry barely appears in that. So I think they may be thinking, we don't really like the appearance of this character, let's change it, but we gotta do the trailer, so let's just not include his own section, because what if we show his section, but then later on, they're gonna know that he has a completely different appearance? I don't know, though. And there's also no beta version of Clay at all, really. I mean, because the original model of Clay's been around for a while, because here he is in this screenshot with Alpha Terry, with the beta vest and the Alpha head, if you saw in my other video, which I talked about him. It's the same Clay model. There's literally no difference, I think. I mean, the only other quote-unquote beta version of him is the artwork of him, which could have just been stylized. Now that is it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, since this is a really fun one to record and gather evidence on, and I really enjoy this video as well. Yeah. Bye. Step Clay.